equals 2 days after I paid $180,000 for my son's graduation celebration from Warden. The restaurant called me. Not the front desk, not the event coordinator, the general manager. His voice was low, controlled, too controlled. Mr. Callahan, I need you to come down here. Alone. I didn't say anything. He continued, there's footage from the private suite. You need to see it yourself. A pause. And sir, do not tell your wife. That was the moment my body went cold. Not confused, not angry, cold. I have built infrastructure across 3 continents. Ports, freight terminals, warehouses that move millions of dollars an hour. I know the tone of a man who has seen something he cannot unsee. This was that tone. What kind of footage? I asked. I can't explain it over the phone. Another pause. It concerns what happened after your toast. My toast. I had raised a glass to my son Daniel's MBA graduation. I had introduced him to investors. I had told the room he would soon begin transitioning into executive leadership at Callahan Global Logistics. I had told everyone he was ready. I hung up without saying goodbye. My wife, Elise, was in the kitchen when I grabbed my keys. She was standing at the marble island, slicing lemons with careful precision. She always sliced lemons when she was thinking. Clean edges, even pressure, perfect halves. Where are you going? She asked lightly. Her voice carried no suspicion. Not yet. Harbor and Ash called, I said. They misplaced one of the invoices from Saturday. She stopped slicing, just for half a second. Then continued, you should let Daniel handle that. You've been exhausted. Exhausted. That word again. For the last 3 months, I had been exhausted. Confused. Overworking. You're not 35 anymore, Martin. I am 58. I run a global company. I do not get confused about invoices. I won't be long, I said. She turned toward me, wiping her hands on a linen towel. She walked closer than necessary and adjusted the collar of my jacket. You've been dizzy lately, she added softly. Please be careful driving. Her hand lingered on my chest. I smelled her perfume, jasmine and something metallic beneath it. I nodded once and left. Harbor and Ash was quiet at 10:40 a.m. The remnants of Saturday night had been erased. The white orchids were gone. The champagne towers dismantled. The gold graduation banners removed from the private mezzanine. Only the ocean remained beyond the glass walls. Gray, unmoving. Julian Moretti met me at the service entrance instead of the main lobby. He didn't shake my hand. He just gestured for me to follow. We walked past the kitchen, past the wine cellar, down a narrow hallway I had never noticed before, even though I partially funded the renovation 3 years ago. He opened a steel door. Security office. Small, windowless. 3 monitors. 1 paused frame frozen mid-movement. Sit, Julian said. His hands were trembling. What am I looking at? I asked. He pressed play. The screen showed the private suite upstairs. 9:47 p.m. I was on the leather sofa. I remembered feeling tired that night. Not drunk, just heavy. My limbs had felt like wet sand. On the screen, I loosened my tie and leaned back. Within seconds, I was asleep. Too fast. Julian increased the volume. The door opened. Elise walked in first. She closed the door behind her and checked the hallway. Then Daniel entered. Behind him, Ava, my son's girlfriend, the one he planned to propose to next year. They didn't look concerned. They looked focused. Elise stood over me and snapped her fingers near my face. I didn't react. She smiled. Not warmly. Clinically. Ava reached into her clutch and removed a small amber vial. My heart stopped. She poured water into a glass from the carafe beside me. 3 drops. Precise. Not shaking. Practiced. Daniel spoke first. Is that enough? His voice sounded thinner than I remembered. It's concentrated, Ava replied. He'll be foggy for at least 24 hours. Maybe more. Elise crossed her arms. And the neurologist? Already briefed, Ava said. If he shows symptoms again next week, we push for cognitive evaluation. Early onset decline at his age isn't unheard of. I felt something inside my chest tear. On the screen, Daniel rubbed his temples. What if his heart reacts? Elise answered calmly. Then we accelerate. Accelerate. Julian paused the video and looked at me. But I couldn't look away. Play it, I said. He did. Ava handed the glass to Elise, my wife of 14 years. She knelt beside me, lifted my head, pressed the glass to my lips. On the screen, I drank. I don't remember drinking it, but I remember waking up Sunday morning unable to finish a sentence. I remember Daniel correcting me in front of guests. Dad's just tired. I remember Elise telling 2 board members I'd been forgetting meetings. On the screen, Daniel exhaled slowly. How long until we can move assets? Ava answered without hesitation. Once power of attorney is signed, we shift operational control. The Cayman Holding Company is ready. And if he resists? Daniel asked. Elise didn't blink. He won't. She looked down at my unconscious body. He thinks this is stress. He thinks I'm protecting him. Julian stopped the footage. The room felt smaller, the air thinner. Sir, Julian said quietly, I reviewed 3 other events from the past 2 months. Similar pattern. You go to the suite. You wake up disoriented. 3 events, not 1. Systematic. How long have you had this footage? I asked. We only discovered it this morning during a routine audit. Your wife requested deletion of all private suite recordings Saturday night. That flagged compliance. There it was. Deletion. Erasure. Does she know you kept it? I asked. Julian shook his head. No, sir. I stared at the frozen image of my own body on that sofa. Powerless. Open-mouthed. Trusting. This footage never existed, I said calmly. Julian looked confused. Sir, you will copy it to a private drive. Then you will delete it from your system. If anyone asks, the camera is malfunctioned. But, if they know I've seen this, I continued, they won't use drops next time. Silence. Julian understood. You're in danger, he said. I stood up. No, I replied quietly. They are. When I stepped back into the daylight, the ocean looked different. Not calm. Predatory. I checked my phone. 4 missed calls from Elise. 1 from Daniel. A text. Where are you? You sound strange. We're worried. Worried. I sat in my car for a full minute before starting the engine. I had built my empire negotiating with men who would bankrupt you without blinking. But this was different. This wasn't corporate. This was intimate. They hadn't just tried to remove me from the company. They were trying to remove me from myself. I started the car. I needed blood work. I needed evidence. I needed someone who understood legal demolition. And most importantly, I needed to go home and pretend I had seen nothing. The game had already begun. They just didn't know the board had flipped. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my pulse was steady. Not calm. Steady. There is a difference. Calm is peace. Steady is control. Elise was waiting at the front door. She never waits at the door. She stepped forward before Elise reached me before I could take 2 steps into the foyer. Her hand closed around my forearm. Too tight. Martin. Where were you? She asked, breathless in a way that looked rehearsed rather than worried. I let my eyes drift past her shoulder. I went to the marina, I said slowly. I thought I had a meeting. You don't, she replied quickly. You canceled that last week. Don't you remember? There it was. The gentle correction. The soft rewriting of reality. Daniel came down the staircase, phone in hand. He didn't hug me. He studied me. You okay, Dad? He asked carefully. You sound off. I blinked as if trying to focus. I'm just tired, I murmured. Elise guided me toward the living room like a nurse steering a patient. Sit, she said softly. I let my shoulders sag. I let my movements slow. I let them believe the poison was working. Because it was. Just not the way they thought. Over the next hour, I watched them build the case against me. Subtly, efficiently, Daniel mentioned I had repeated the same story at the graduation dinner. Twice, Elise said I had misplaced my passport last month. I hadn't. Ava arrived mid-afternoon with fresh pastries and a sympathetic smile. She kissed my cheek. "You look pale, Mr. Callahan," she said gently. She smelled like citrus and antiseptic. "I feel fine," I replied, letting my voice tremble just slightly. Elise exchanged a glance with Daniel. "Accelerate." Julian paused the video and looked at me. But I couldn't look away. "Play it," I said. He did. Ava handed the glass to Elise, my wife of 14 years. She knelt beside me, lifted my head, pressed the glass to my lips. On the screen, I drank. I don't remember drinking it, but I remember waking up Sunday morning unable to finish a sentence. I remember Daniel correcting me in front of guests. "Dad's just tired." I remember Elise telling 2 board members I'd been forgetting meetings. On the screen, Daniel exhaled slowly. "How long until we can move assets?" Ava answered without hesitation. "Once power of attorney is signed, we shift operational control. The Cayman Holding Company is ready." "And if he resists?" Daniel asked. Elise didn't blink. "He won't." She looked down at my unconscious body. "He thinks this is stress. He thinks I'm protecting him." Julian stopped the footage. The room felt smaller, the air thinner. "Sir," Julian said quietly, "I reviewed 3 other events from the past 2 months. Similar pattern. You go to the suite. You wake up disoriented. 3 events, not 1. Systematic. How long have you had this footage?" I asked. "We only discovered it this morning during a routine audit. Your wife requested deletion of all private suite recordings Saturday night. That flagged compliance. There it was. Deletion. Erasure. Does she know you kept it?" I asked. Julian shook his head. "No, sir." I stared at the frozen image of my own body on that sofa. Powerless, open-mouthed, trusting. "This footage never existed," I said calmly. Julian looked confused. "Sir, you will copy it to a private drive. Then you will delete it from your system. If anyone asks, the cameras malfunctioned. But, if they know I've seen this," I continued, "they won't use drops next time." Silence. Julian understood. "You're in danger," he said. I stood up. "No," I replied quietly. "They are." When I stepped back into the daylight, the ocean looked different. Not calm, predatory. I checked my phone. 4 missed calls from Elise. 1 from Daniel. A text. "Where are you? You sound strange. We're worried." Worried. I sat in my car for a full minute before starting the engine. I had built my empire negotiating with men who would bankrupt you without blinking. But this was different. This wasn't corporate. This was intimate. They hadn't just tried to remove me from the company. They were trying to remove me from myself. I started the car. I needed blood work. I needed evidence. I needed someone who understood legal demolition. And most importantly, I needed to go home and pretend I had seen nothing. The game had already begun. They just didn't know the board had flipped. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my pulse was steady. Not calm. Steady. There is a difference. Calm is peace. Steady is control. Elise was waiting at the front door. She never waits at the door. She stepped forward before Elise reached me before I could take 2 steps into the foyer. Her hand closed around my forearm. Too tight. "Martin, where were you?" she asked, breathless in a way that looked rehearsed rather than worried. I let my eyes drift past her shoulder. "I went to the marina," I said slowly. "I thought I had a meeting." "You don't," she replied quickly. "You canceled that last week. Don't you remember?" There it was. The gentle correction. The soft rewriting of reality. Daniel came down the staircase, phone in hand. He didn't hug me. He studied me. "You okay, Dad?" he asked carefully. "You sound off." I blinked as if trying to focus. "I'm just tired," I murmured. Elise guided me toward the living room like a nurse steering a patient. "Sit," she said softly. I let my shoulders sag. I let my movements slow. I let them believe the poison was working. Because it was. Just not the way they thought. Over the next hour, I watched them build the case against me. Subtly, efficiently, Daniel mentioned I had repeated the same story at the graduation dinner. Twice. Elise said I had misplaced my passport last month. I hadn't. Ava arrived mid-afternoon with fresh pastries and a sympathetic smile. She kissed my cheek. You look pale, Mr. Callahan, she said gently. She smelled like citrus and antiseptic. I feel fine, I replied, letting my voice tremble just slightly. Elise exchanged a glance with Daniel. Then we adjust dosage, she said calmly. Dosage. Daniel hesitated. What if something goes wrong? Ava leaned closer. Then it's an accident. My grip tightened on the railing. Stress-induced cardiac event. He's 58. It happens. Elise entered the kitchen. We don't want a scene, she said evenly. Not before the transfer. Transfer. The word settled like ash. They weren't just planning to control me. They were planning to replace me. Soon, I returned to my bedroom without making a sound. They were no longer testing the waters. They were preparing the tide. And I had exactly 3 days before Friday. 3 days before a neurologist confirmed the narrative they were writing. 3 days before they pushed for legal incapacity. 3 days before I disappeared. They believed I was deteriorating. They believed I was compliant. They believed I was alone. They were wrong. Elise reached me before I could take 2 steps into the foyer. Her hand closed around my forearm. Too tight. Martin. Where were you? She asked, breathless in a way that looked rehearsed rather than worried. I let my eyes drift past her shoulder. I went to the marina, I said slowly. I thought I had a meeting. You don't, she replied quickly. You canceled that last week. Don't you remember? There it was. The gentle correction. The soft rewriting of reality. Daniel came down the staircase, phone in hand. He didn't hug me. He studied me. You okay, Dad? He asked carefully. You sound off. I blinked as if trying to focus. I'm just tired, I murmured. Elise guided me toward the living room like a nurse steering a patient. Sit, she said softly. I let my shoulders sag. I let my movements slow. I let them believe the poison was working. Because it was. Just not the way they thought. Over the next hour, I watched them build the case against me. Subtly, efficiently, Daniel mentioned I had repeated the same story at the graduation dinner. Twice. Elise said I had misplaced my passport last month. I hadn't. Ava arrived mid-afternoon with fresh pastries and a sympathetic smile. She kissed my cheek. You look pale, Mr. Callahan, she said gently. She smelled like citrus and antiseptic. I feel fine, I replied, letting my voice tremble just slightly. Elise exchanged a glance with Daniel. The look said, denial. They were documenting behavior, creating a pattern. When Ava stepped into the kitchen, I heard the faint clink of glass. Ice in a tumbler, liquid poured. I waited. Elise returned with a tall glass of sparkling water. Hydrate, she said. You've been dizzy. I took the glass. I raised it. I paused. Not enough to alarm them. Just enough to observe. Daniel leaned against the fireplace. Watching. I took a small sip. Barely wet my lips. Then coughed. Hard. The glass slipped from my fingers and shattered against the marble floor. Jesus, Dad, Daniel muttered, stepping forward. Elise knelt beside me. Are you okay? She asked loudly. Too loudly. Performing. I held my chest. I don't feel right, I whispered. Ava appeared instantly with a napkin. Her eyes went to the spilled liquid. Assessing. I saw irritation flash across her face. They hadn't expected waste. Maybe we should call Dr. Hensley, Daniel suggested. Oh, the neurologist. Elise squeezed my shoulder. Yes, she said. We need to document this. Document. I let my head fall back against the couch cushion. Don't call anyone, I murmured weakly. Silence. That was not the response they wanted. Elise stroked my hair. Martin, this is for your protection. Protection. I almost laughed. That night, they escalated. We were supposed to attend a small dinner with 2 board members at our house. Daniel insisted we keep it. It'll look strange if we cancel, he said. Strange. The word hung in the air. They needed witnesses. At 7:30 p.m., our guests arrived. I stayed in my study upstairs until Elise came to fetch me. You can manage 1 hour, she said gently. Just smile. Let Daniel do the talking. I nodded slowly. Descending the staircase felt theatrical. Every step measured, every breath slightly uneven. When I entered the dining room, conversation stalled for half a second. Just enough. Daniel stood at the head of the table. My seat. Dad, he said with exaggerated warmth. We saved you your spot. Not at the head. To his right. I noticed. So did the guests. Subtle, but deliberate. During dinner, Daniel answered questions directed at me. Twice, when I began explaining a new port acquisition, he gently interrupted. What Dad means, he said smoothly, is that we're exploring options. Exploring, as if I were brainstorming, as if decisions weren't already executed. Elise laughed lightly. He's been mixing up timelines lately, she told one of the board members. It's just stress. The board member nodded politely. I saw doubt enter his eyes. Seeds. They were planting seeds. I set my fork down. Daniel, I said clearly. He froze. Yes, finish the quarterly margin breakdown for Rotterdam. Silence. His jaw tightened. He hadn't reviewed it. I knew he hadn't. He fumbled. Elise and I have been discussing a strategic realignment. I leaned back. Numbers, I said calmly. He swallowed. The guests shifted in their chairs. Elise cut in quickly. Martin, this isn't the time. She touched my hand under the table. Hard. Warning. I blinked as if confused. Right, I muttered. I'm sorry. I get ahead of myself. Daniel exhaled. Relief. Control regained. They thought I had slipped. But I hadn't. I had just reminded them. I was still dangerous. After the guests left, Elise closed the dining room doors. Her expression changed instantly. Do not embarrass us like that again, she said coldly. Us. Daniel stood behind her. Silent. You're tired, she continued. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking very clearly, I replied softly. A mistake. Her eyes sharpened. Too sharp. I let my gaze drift. I think I am. I corrected weakly. She relaxed. There it was again. The script required my confusion. I provided it. Daniel stepped forward. We've scheduled a cognitive assessment Friday, he said. Just to be safe. Friday. 3 days. Accelerating. Do I have a choice? I asked. Elise smiled gently. Of course. But her eyes said no. That night, I didn't sleep. At 2:17 a.m., I heard voices downstairs. Low. Urgent. I moved quietly to the top of the staircase. Daniel and Ava stood near the kitchen island. She's pushing for Friday, Daniel said. That's too slow, Ava replied. If the neurologist confirms decline, we move immediately. And if he resists? A pause. Then we adjust dosage, she said calmly. Dosage. Daniel hesitated. What if something goes wrong? Ava leaned closer. Then it's an accident. My grip tightened on the railing. Stress-induced cardiac event. He's 58. It happens. Elise entered the kitchen. We don't want a scene, she said evenly. Not before the transfer. Transfer. The word settled like ash. They weren't just planning to control me. They were planning to replace me. Soon, I returned to my bedroom without making a sound. They were no longer testing the waters. They were preparing the tide. And I had exactly 3 days before Friday. 3 days before a neurologist confirmed the narrative they were writing. 3 days before they pushed for legal incapacity. 3 days before I disappeared. They believed I was deteriorating. They believed I was compliant. They believed I was alone. They were wrong. I didn't wait until Friday. At 6:10 a.m., before anyone else in the house woke up, I left. No note, no explanation. I drove to a private clinic in Coral Gables run by a man I had once helped finance when banks wouldn't touch him. Dr. Rafael Ibarra. He owed me nothing, but he respected precision. When I walked into his office, he didn't ask how I was. He looked at my pupils. Sedatives, he said quietly. Maybe more. I need a full panel, I replied. Blood, urine, hair, everything. While the nurse prepared the draws, I replayed the footage in my mind. 3 drops. Precise. Practiced. Not impulsive. Ibarra returned 40 minutes later. Preliminary scan shows benzodiazepines in your system, he said. Not prescribed. How long? Repeated exposure, he answered. Low dose. Cumulative. Systematic. Anything else? I asked. He hesitated. Micro traces of scopolamine. I held his gaze. Explain. It's sometimes used for motion sickness, he said carefully. But in certain doses, it causes confusion. Suggestibility. Memory gaps. Suggestibility. They weren't just sedating me. They were rewriting me. How dangerous? I asked. With your cardiac profile? He leaned back. Unpredictable. Unpredictable. The same word Daniel used at dinner. I exhaled slowly. Can it be lethal? In the right combination, yes. There it was. Not just control. Risk. I left with sealed lab reports and an electronic copy encrypted onto a private drive. On the drive home, my phone rang. Elise. I let it ring twice before answering. Martin, where are you? Her voice carried a thin edge. Out, I said. You left without telling anyone. I didn't want to wake you. A pause. You sound clearer, she observed. Do I? Silence again. We're worried, she repeated. Of course you are. You should rest, she added. We don't want another episode. I let my voice soften. I'll be home soon. When I pulled into the driveway, Daniel was waiting outside. He wasn't smiling. Where did you go? He asked. Walk, I replied. He studied my face. You seem different. I let my eyes unfocus slightly. Do I? He exhaled, frustrated. Elise is setting up Friday's appointment. We need cooperation. Of course, I said gently. Always agree. Always drift. Never resist. That was the character they expected. I played it well. That afternoon, I called the only attorney I trusted to dismantle something quietly. Charles Avery, former federal prosecutor, now corporate litigation specialist. We met in his downtown office at 4:30 p.m. I placed the drive on his desk. Watch, I said. He didn't speak during the playback. When it ended, he leaned back slowly. This isn't about control, he said. No, it's attempted coercion at minimum. Possibly attempted homicide. Yes, he folded his hands. What do you want? That was the right question. Not, are you okay? Not, how do you feel? What do you want? I want them to believe they've won, I said calmly. He raised an eyebrow. And then? I want consequences that can't be reversed. Charles nodded slowly. All right, he said. Then we build a trap. The trap had 3 layers. Layer 1. Medical confirmation. The toxicology report would be notarized and sealed. Layer 2. Financial bait. Daniel had been pushing to formalize a transfer of executive authority. We would accelerate it, but not the way he expected. Layer 3. Criminal liability. Charles drafted a temporary power of attorney structured through a Cayman holding company, exactly where Ava had mentioned. But embedded inside it was a conditional clause. If the transfer of authority was found to be obtained through medical manipulation, coercion, or chemical impairment. Automatic criminal referral, asset freeze, immediate reversal, and personal liability attached to every signatory. It's aggressive, Charles said. Good, I replied, but you'll need them to sign it willingly. They will. How? I thought of Friday, of the neurologist, of the quiet, careful poisoning. I'll give them what they want, I said. That evening, Elise prepared dinner herself. She rarely cooks. That should have been the first red flag months ago. She placed a bowl of soup in front of me. Steam rising. Her eyes watching. Daniel sat across from me. Ava beside him. 3 faces. 3 observers. I lifted the spoon. Let it tremble. Halfway to my mouth, I stopped. Did I already eat? I asked softly. Elise reached across the table. No, darling. Darling. I swallowed 1 sip. Only 1. Excused myself. Upstairs, I spat it into a sealed container. Evidence. When I returned to the table, I let my shoulders sag further. Daniel leaned toward Ava. She's right, he whispered. It's worse. Worse. I almost admired the choreography. Friday arrived. The neurologist's office smelled sterile. Dr. Hensley greeted me with clinical sympathy. We began cognitive tests, memory recall, pattern recognition, mathematics. I answered incorrectly, not obviously, subtly, enough to raise concern. Daniel sat beside me, nodding with performative sadness. Elise dabbed her eyes. Ava observed quietly. After 45 minutes, Dr. Hensley cleared his throat. There are mild cognitive inconsistencies, he said carefully. It may warrant further evaluation. Further evaluation. Exactly what they needed. Elise squeezed my hand. See? She whispered. I nodded weakly. Yes, I murmured. Maybe I'm not myself. Not yourself. That was the phrase they were building toward. That night, Daniel approached me in my study. We should formalize a temporary transition, he said gently. Just until you're stable. Temporary. I looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time since the footage, I let a flicker of something real pass through my eyes. Hurt. He saw it. He hesitated. Then recovered. It's just paperwork, Dad. Paperwork. Yes, I said quietly. Let's sign it. His relief was immediate. Visible. Tomorrow? He asked. Tomorrow. He left the room smiling. Upstairs, I locked the study door, opened the encrypted drive, reviewed the footage again, not for pain, for precision. They thought they were accelerating. They didn't realize they had already stepped into the mechanism. Saturday night was supposed to be about Daniel. His MBA graduation celebration. Investors flying in from London. 2 board members from Singapore. 3 private equity partners I had known for 20 years. It was meant to be his moment. Instead, it became theirs. And they had no idea. The signing took place that morning in my study. Elise arranged it. Ava coordinated the paperwork. Daniel pretended to hesitate. The documents were thick. Dozens of pages. Temporary executive authority. Operational access. Expanded oversight on the Cayman holding structure. Exactly what they had whispered about in the restaurant suite. Charles had worked all night embedding the clause. Hidden in legal density. Buried in cross-referenced language. A conditional trigger. If the authority transfer was later proven to have been obtained through chemical impairment, coercion, falsified medical evaluation, or intentional cognitive manipulation, every signatory would face automatic criminal exposure, personal liability, federal referral, immediate freeze of all connected accounts, no discretionary delay, no internal arbitration, direct escalation. They had wanted acceleration. I gave them velocity. Elise placed the pen in front of me. Her hand was steady. Just a safeguard, she said softly. Until you're stronger. Stronger. Daniel stood by the window, pretending to look conflicted. You don't have to if you're uncomfortable, he said. He wanted me to insist. To prove trust. I studied each of them. Ava's posture was composed, her eyes sharp, calculating. I let my fingers tremble slightly. Read it to me, I said. Daniel blinked. It's standard. I struggle with long documents lately, I murmured. Elise stepped forward. I'll summarize. Perfect. She summarized what she believed mattered, not what actually did. When she finished, I nodded slowly. Okay, I said, and I signed. Then Elise signed. Then Daniel. Then Ava. 4 signatures. 4 anchors. Charles had arranged for notarization through a remote compliance system. Time-stamped. Filed. Irreversible. Daniel exhaled audibly. Relief. He thought he had just taken control of a global logistics empire. What he had actually taken was responsibility for a crime. That evening, Harbor and Ash was transformed again. Gold banners. White orchids. A string quartet near the glass wall overlooking the ocean. Daniel stood at the center of the room in a tailored navy suit. Elise wore emerald silk. Ava glowed in champagne satin. I arrived last, not by accident. I wanted the room already warm, already committed. When I entered, a few heads turned. Then more, not out of admiration, out of uncertainty. Daniel walked toward me quickly. You're late, he said under his breath. Traffic, I replied. He scanned my face. You okay? I let my focus blur just enough. I think so. He smiled for the guests. Let's get through tonight. Through. Like I was an obstacle. Dinner progressed smoothly. Investors congratulated Daniel. Spoke about fresh leadership. One of the Singapore directors leaned toward Elise. It's impressive how seamlessly you're managing the transition. Transition. That word again. Daniel gave a speech halfway through the second course. He thanked the board. He thanked Ava. He thanked Elise. Then he looked at me. None of this would have been possible without my father, he said. Polite applause. But as all great companies evolve, leadership must evolve too. There it was. Public positioning. He continued. We're entering a new era at Callahan Global. More agile. More modern. Agile. Modern. Implied contrast. And with Dad focusing on his health. The pause. Deliberate. We're ensuring stability. A few guests exchanged glances. I felt it. The subtle shift in the room. Not humiliation through insult. Humiliation through assumption. I was being retired. Live. Elise rose next. Martin has carried the weight of this company for decades, she said gently. Now it's our turn to protect him. Protect. As if I were fragile. As if I were fading. I saw one investor tilt his head slightly. Concern. Not for me. For governance. That was their narrative. Deteriorating founder. Responsible wife. Prepared son. Clean succession. I let them finish. Let applause ripple through the room. Then I stood. No microphone. No toast. Just standing. Conversations quieted. Daniel's jaw tightened. Dad, he began. I held up a hand. Not aggressively. Simply to pause him. I have something to show you, I said calmly. Julian stepped forward from near the bar. He had been waiting. 3 technicians moved discreetly toward the projection system. Daniel frowned. What is this? Clarity, I replied. The screen behind the quartet flickered to life. 9:47 p.m. Private suite. Leather sofa. Me. Sleeping. The room fell silent. Absolute. On screen, Elise entered. Closed the door. Daniel followed. Ava removed the vial. Gasps. Real ones. Not polite. Not controlled. Daniel turned pale. Turn that off, he hissed. Julian didn't move. 3 drops. Precise. On the screen, I drank. The audio carried through the entire hall. If he resists, we adjust dosage. Someone near the front whispered, "Oh my God." Elise's composure fractured. Martin, she said sharply. This isn't what it looks like. The neurologist conversation played next. Early onset decline. Accelerate. Transfer. Ava stepped backward. Daniel reached for the projection cable. Security blocked him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. When the footage ended, the room remained frozen. I spoke evenly. This morning, you all witnessed a transition of authority. I paused. Embedded within that transfer is a clause. Charles stepped forward from the back of the room. He had been standing near the exit the entire time. In the event that the transfer was obtained through chemical impairment or coercion, he announced clearly, automatic criminal referral is triggered. Daniel stared at me. What did you do? He whispered. I looked at him. I trusted you. The doors opened. Not dramatically. Not violently. Federal agents entered calmly. Efficient. Focused. The room parted. Elise stepped backward. Ava tried to speak. Daniel looked at the floor. Agents approached each of them. This can't be real, Elise said. It is, I replied. You're destroying your own family. No, I said quietly. You did that. Handcuffs clicked. Not loudly, but loud enough. As they were escorted out, Daniel looked at me once. Not angry. Not defiant. Afraid. I didn't look away. Not this time. The room remained silent long after they were gone. Investors stood in shock. One of them approached me cautiously. Martin, we had no idea. I know, I replied. And that was true. They didn't. They had only seen what was presented. Just like I had. Until the restaurant called. The string quartet never resumed. One of the violinists lowered her instrument mid-note and simply stood there. bow hanging loosely in her hand, as federal agents escorted my wife, my son, and the woman he planned to marry out through the service exit. No shouting, no dramatic struggle, just the quiet, irreversible sound of metal closing around wrists. The investors didn't move for several seconds after the doors shut. They weren't sure if they were witnesses to a family collapse or a corporate implosion. In truth, it was both. Julian cut the projection feed. The screen went black. The reflection of the room stared back at us. Stunned faces, half-finished wine glasses, white orchids that suddenly looked funereal instead of celebratory. One of the Singapore directors cleared his throat. "Martin," he said carefully, "is the company secure?" There it was. Not, "Are you all right?" Not, "I'm sorry." Secure. I nodded once. Yes. My voice didn't waver. Operations remain unaffected. The clause executed immediately. Asset freeze applies only to the signatories. He studied me. "You anticipated this?" "Yes." Another investor stepped forward. "Were you in danger?" I held his gaze. "Yes." Silence deepened. No one asked another question. I left Harbor and Ash alone. No driver. No escort. The ocean outside was black now, the tide rolling in with slow, patient force. When I sat in my car, my hands finally trembled. Not from fear, from release. I had just dismantled my own family in front of a room full of financiers. There is no training manual for that. There is only preparation. By midnight, the story began circulating. Not publicly, privately. Board members texting each other. Investors calling counsel. Within hours, 3 major publications requested comment. Charles handled all responses. "Internal governance issue under investigation," he said. Controlled. Measured. By 2 a.m., Daniel's face was trending in business circles. Rising executive arrested at graduation gala. They liked the irony. Sunday morning, I walked into headquarters. No announcement. No press. Just the elevator ride to the executive floor. The receptionist looked up and froze. "Mr. Callahan," she said quietly. "Good morning," I replied. Normal, as if nothing had shifted. But everything had. I entered the boardroom. 6 members were already seated. None met my eyes at first. Then one did. "We owe you an apology," he said. "For what?" I asked calmly. "For assuming." I nodded. "Assumptions are expensive." Another board member leaned forward. "Were you truly being drugged?" "Yes." "Repeatedly?" "Yes." A pause. "And you chose not to inform us earlier." I met his gaze directly. I needed certainty. No one challenged that. They had all built careers on certainty. By Tuesday, toxicology confirmation was filed with federal authorities. By Wednesday, formal charges were announced. Chemical coercion, conspiracy, fraudulent medical manipulation, attempted financial exploitation. The language was clinical, precise, emotionless, exactly how I preferred it. Daniel requested a meeting, not through lawyers, through a handwritten note delivered to Charles's office. "I need to speak to you without cameras." I considered ignoring it. Instead, I agreed. The holding room was small. Glass partition between us. He looked different without a tailored suit. Less polished, more human. He sat down slowly. "Did you ever plan to step down?" he asked first. That surprised me. "Yes," I said. When you were ready." He swallowed. "I thought you'd never let go." I leaned forward slightly. "You never asked." He looked away. "You always controlled everything." "I built everything," I replied evenly. Control wasn't ego. It was responsibility. Silence stretched. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said quietly. "You discussed accelerating my death," I answered. His face drained. "I didn't mean. You didn't stop it." That landed. He pressed his palms together. "I thought it was just sedation. Temporary. And if my heart stopped?" He had no answer. "Why?" I asked finally. He closed his eyes. "Because I felt invisible." Invisible. For a moment, something inside me shifted. Not forgiveness. Understanding. "You weren't invisible," I said quietly. "You were unprepared." He flinched. "I wanted you to see me as equal." You don't become equal by poisoning the structure that supports you. His hands trembled. I'm going to lose everything. Yes, I replied. That was not cruelty. That was consequence. Elise did not request a meeting. Her attorney sent a statement instead. She believed she was protecting the company from your instability. Instability. Even now, no apology, just justification. Ava cooperated quickly. She provided details of dosage schedules, neurologist coordination, asset transfer planning. She secured a lighter charge. Strategic to the end. The media cycle intensified for 2 weeks. Then it moved on. It always does. Scandal has a short half-life unless you feed it. I did not. I gave one statement. This was not about succession. It was about integrity. No elaboration. No emotion. One evening, I returned to Harbor and Ash. Not for an event. For dinner. Alone. Julian greeted me at the entrance. We upgraded the private suite security, he said. Good. He hesitated. I'm sorry. For what? For not seeing it sooner. You weren't supposed to. I requested the same table overlooking the ocean. No banners. No orchestra. Just the tide moving in and out like it always had. Halfway through the meal, I noticed something. For the first time in months. No dizziness. No fog. No subtle pressure behind my eyes. My body felt like mine again. That realization hurt more than the betrayal. Because it meant they had been slowly erasing me. And I had nearly let them. The company stabilized quickly. Interim leadership was installed. Operational audits tightened. Medical privacy protocols rewritten. No single executive would ever again have unmonitored authority over founder health documentation. I redesigned the structure they had tried to weaponize. Quietly, systematically. 3 months later, Daniel accepted a plea agreement. Reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation. Elise faced trial. Ava testified. I did not attend every hearing. Only the first, and the last. When the verdict was read, Elise looked at me across the courtroom. You chose business over family, she said softly as officers approached. No, I replied. You chose control over loyalty. I shook my head. You chose ambition over love. The handcuffs closed. Her eyes never left mine. You'll be alone, she said. Perhaps, but I would be alive. That night, I sat in my study. The same desk where I signed the transfer. The same room where they thought I was fading. I poured a glass of water. Watched it. Smelled it. Drank it. No hesitation. No fear. Just clarity. They believed they were accelerating the inevitable. They believed they were modernizing leadership. They believed I was declining. What they failed to understand was that patience is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. And structure, once corrected, does not collapse again. The ocean outside my window moved steadily in the dark. Predatory. Patient. Just like truth. End of part 6. If you want, we can now. 2 weeks after the arrests, the house felt unfamiliar. Not empty. Structured differently. Elise's perfume was gone from the air. Daniel's footsteps no longer echoed down the hallway in the mornings. No more quiet strategy sessions over coffee in the kitchen. Silence has texture. This one was heavy but clean. I walked through each room deliberately. The dining table where Daniel had once practiced presentations. The study where Elise pretended to worry about my fatigue. The staircase where I had overheard them discussing dosage. Every space held a version of me that almost disappeared. That is the part no one talks about. Not the betrayal. The erasure. They had begun to narrate my decline before it existed. And had I reacted emotionally? Had I shouted that night at the gala? Had I tried to defend myself without evidence? They might have succeeded. That realization lingered longer than anger. The board requested a closed session. No assistants. No legal teams. Just 6 directors and me. One of them spoke first. You handled it decisively. That was necessary, I replied. Another leaned forward. Were you ever afraid? Yes. The admission surprised them. Not because I said it. Because I said it calmly. Afraid of what? He asked. Not dying, I said. Losing credibility. That was the true weapon they aimed at me. not the sedatives. Perception. If a founder appears unstable, markets adjust. Investors recalibrate. Influence evaporates quietly. They were not just attacking my body. They were repositioning my legacy. I let that sit in the room. No one argued. Daniel's sentencing hearing took place on a humid Thursday morning. He stood straighter than I expected. Paler, thinner, but no longer arrogant. When the judge asked if he wished to speak, he did. I convinced myself this was strategic, he said. I called it transition. I told myself I was protecting shareholders. He swallowed. I was protecting my ego. The courtroom remained still. He didn't look at me until the very end. I thought if I controlled the timing, I controlled the narrative. He paused. I didn't understand. My father built the narrative. That was the closest he came to apology. I nodded once, not in approval, in acknowledgement. After the hearing, reporters gathered outside. Microphones extended. Mr. Callahan, do you regret involving federal authorities? No. Do you regret making it public? It was already public, I replied. Just not to me. Do you forgive them? Forgiveness. A word people throw around when they're uncomfortable. I understand them, I said. And walked away. Months passed. The foundation I established years ago, originally intended for maritime scholarships, expanded. I redirected a significant portion of my personal holdings into it. Not out of vengeance, out of correction. Daniel once believed the company was the prize. It wasn't. The structure was. And structure outlives individuals. I met with 3 scholarship recipients that autumn. Young men from dockworker families. Bright, hungry, grateful. One of them asked, "Sir, how did you build something this big?" I considered the question carefully. By assuming nothing is permanent, I answered. He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. The final hearing for Elise came in winter. Snow fell lightly outside the courthouse. She maintained composure throughout. When the sentence was delivered, she didn't cry. She turned toward me instead. "You could have handled this privately," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "You humiliated me." I held her gaze. "You humiliated me first." That was the truth neither of us could rewrite. That night, I returned home. No celebration, no satisfaction, just stillness. I poured another glass of water, sat in the dark study, and allowed myself one honest thought. I had not only lost a wife, I had lost the illusion that loyalty protects you from ambition. But I had not lost myself. That was the victory. Weeks later, I received a letter. Handwritten. Daniels, I finally understand the difference between control and responsibility. I confused authority with entitlement. I don't expect forgiveness, but I will not repeat this pattern. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in a drawer. Not for sentiment, for record, because that is what remains when emotion fades. Record. On the anniversary of that phone call, I returned once more to Harbor and Ash. The private suite had been renovated. New security, new protocols. Julian greeted me with quiet respect. "No incidents since," he said. "There won't be," I replied. I stood by the glass wall overlooking the ocean. The same tide, the same horizon, but I was not the same man who had answered that call. Back then, I thought I was attending a celebration. Instead, I walked into revelation. They believed I was fading. They believed they were accelerating the inevitable. They believed narrative would outrun evidence. They were wrong. I did not destroy them. They exposed themselves. All I did was watch and wait. Calm justice doesn't shout. It keeps records.